This is Copilot for Microsoft 365 running a Power Automate flow to get data from a SharePoint list, all initiated just using natural language and Teams. If this is the kind of thing you're interested in finding out about, then keep watching, as I'm going to dig into all the possibilities like this that currently exist with Copilot. There are really two questions I'm getting asked about Copilot for Microsoft 365 right now. The first is, how should you use it? The second, that comes a bit later, is how do you get it to work with this particular system we use for this process or that process? This makes sense, as pretty much every business I work with has at least some of their data or processes outside of Microsoft 365. So while Copilot for Microsoft 365 may offer some amazing features, if Copilot has blind spots with data it doesn't see, then is it really going to be as useful as claimed? Luckily, Microsoft has built Copilot so you can make its reach extendable, and through a variety of methods, all with different levels of complication and potential cost, you'll really be able to make this new tool able to interact with pretty much any system or data source you might already be using. So in this video, I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of the issue of Copilot Extensibility, digging into what's available, what's going to be available, and what might become available in the future. Bear in mind that much of what we're talking about here is either just announced or in preview or only available with limited features. So in many scenarios, and probably those that are most relevant to the smaller businesses I generally work with, this is future-looking information in most cases, rather than something you're going to want to activate off the shelf today. But before we dive in, a quick introduction. My name is Nick DeCourcy. I'm the owner of Bright Ideas Agency, a digital transformation consulting company focused on the needs of small and medium-sized businesses. I'm also the author of Who's in the Copilot Seat, a guide for small business leaders on the adoption of AI. If you're interested in working with me or in finding out about my book, then take a look at the links below. So first, let us consider what we're talking about when we're thinking of extending Copilot for Microsoft 365. We know that out of the box, Copilot has a reach that includes most, if not all, of what is exposed to you as a user within your Microsoft 365 data. This is leveraging the database called the Microsoft Graph and exposing the Copilot semantic index, which is made up of a personal index and a tenant index, with contents indexed as shown in this table. One of the key steps necessary to get Copilot for Microsoft 365 working effectively and safely in your environment is to ensure that users only have access to the data they need to do their job, and that your data is controlled in a way that keeps it secure. But the flip side of this consideration of just enough access is that if Copilot cannot see data that a user relies on to do their job, then the efficacy of its work may equally be compromised. Sending a client too much information, or the wrong information, is one side of a problem, but communicating with them while ignoring key information about their account is another side of that problem that can have extremely negative impacts on your business. The data that isn't available to Copilot may be in lots of places. It might be in places inside Microsoft 365 that just aren't indexed by Copilot, such as shared mailboxes. It might be in other Microsoft entities that are outside the scope of the Microsoft Graph, such as Dynamics 365, Power Platform, or Fabric. It might be in Azure. It might be in other clouds like AWS. It might be on-premise, on physical servers you control. And finally, it might be in third-party systems such as Salesforce or QuickBooks. The possibilities are almost endless, as are the varieties and scales of data we might be working with. Microsoft considers Copilot Extensibility along two dimensions: skills and knowledge. The base layer is the large language model, which itself has some general knowledge based on its training, and skills, such as generating contextually appropriate text. Then on top of that, we have Copilot itself, which is the orchestration technology that allows you to seamlessly feed the AI model appropriate contextual data and then take actions on its outputs. In terms of knowledge, Copilot knows everything it has indexed in your tenant's graph. In terms of skills, it can do things like edit a Word document or build a new PowerPoint presentation. Then there's the extensibility layer, where the sky is really the limit, and you could expand Copilot's knowledge by perhaps giving it access to all your service tickets, but you can extend its skills by allowing it to mark a ticket as complete. We could really apply this framework across any type of data or service. Across the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, there are already a whole bunch of technologies that are dedicated to making it interoperable with data or services that exist elsewhere. And Microsoft has decided to not reinvent the wheel when it comes to extending Copilot. The vast majority of tools that already allow extension of Microsoft 365 work with Copilot. But this approach also means that Copilot Extension isn't just one set of options. It's dozens of options of varying levels of cost and complexity. Choosing the wrong path for your needs could send you down a deep rabbit hole, and whereas in the past you might have got away with focusing on some of these options and not others, depending on what tools you used, now, in the age of Copilot, anyone thinking of extending Copilot on an organisational level must have a reasonable understanding of a far greater range of options to be able to choose whichever is most suitable. So let's dive into what those options are. Where practical, I'll give some examples on screen or screen recording shared by Microsoft, but remember that most of what we're talking about here is not currently fully baked. As always, every demo you see in this video is for example purposes only and doesn't show anyone's private data. Before we dig deeper into Copilot Extensibility, can I ask a favour? If you're enjoying and getting value from this video, please give it a like to help it get in front of more people. If you want to see more like this, why not subscribe too? And drop me a comment on what you're most excited to connect to Copilot. So we can really break Copilot's extensibility layer down to three sets of options. There's options that live in the low-code Power Platform world to create plugins, and also pro-code focused plugins that are focused around the technology used for message extensions in Teams or Outlook. These plugin options offer skills enhancement for Copilot, and then we have a class of extension for knowledge enhancement, graph connectors. What graph connectors do is allow you to directly expand the reach of the Microsoft Graph. So along with benefiting the data available to Copilot, you also benefit any user in your organisation using Microsoft Search. They are set up on a tenant-wide basis by an admin, and if you want to access one of the data sources for which an existing connector is available, it can be a fairly straightforward process to set them up, driven by a kind of store-like experience. Just be aware that if you're coming from the Power Platform world and getting excited hearing the word connector, Power Platform connectors and graph connectors are not interchangeable. They are a one-way, read-only connection, and depending on the data source, can apply security profiles that allow you to restrict access to data in the same way that it's already restricted on a per-user basis inside Microsoft 365. And even if there isn't a connector available, if your data can be accessed using an API, you can build your own. However, this does require planning and pro-code skills. Graph connectors, in my view, are an enterprise tier offering, as unless you have a vast number of Microsoft 365 E5 licensed users, or those licensed with Copilot for Microsoft 365, it can be really expensive to have enough index quota to expand your index in this way. You are also limited on the total number of graph connectors you can use per tenant, so it's important to plan if you are a large organisation. The key benefit of a graph connector is because it expands the graph index rather than acting on a transactional basis. Unstructured knowledge that exists within your connected sources makes Copilot smarter across a topic or a domain of information, rather than relying on pulling a specific record related to a specific query. As it stands, graph connectors is really the only Copilot extension option that is fully baked and might already be deployed fairly widely within organisations. Next, let's consider the broad category of enhancements that allow Copilot to expand its skills. These are described as plugins, and the first I want to talk about is Teams message extensions. If your organisation uses Teams, you're probably already familiar with message extensions. These are the tools that allow you to push a service-connected adaptive card into your Teams chats, so you can take actions on your business app or SaaS product right there in Teams. You can add them into Teams from the Teams app catalog as a user, or you can deploy them to users as an admin. And there's now a new category of app, flagged as works with Copilot. With Copilot, a message extension can be enabled as a plugin, can pull data into your chat, and then within that chat with Copilot you can take action on the data using a similar adaptive card interface to what you've previously seen in Teams. Here you're seeing an example recorded by Microsoft of how a plugin connected to Jira can work in a chat with Copilot. Right now, the plugin experience is only available in Microsoft 365 Chat in Teams, and it's probably down to having the right tooling in place to make these types of experiences work. However, to qualify as a Copilot plugin, a Teams message extension must meet certain criteria. So right now, of the hundreds of Teams apps available, only a handful are shown up as working with Copilot. You're probably wondering, why might this be? The message extensions, and potentially the cloud service behind them, need to be upgraded to work with how Copilot works. Copilot search through the extension will be based on natural language, and the extension needs to flag how to do this. Because Copilot understands what any plugin can do based upon the natural language description of the plugin, at a minimum, how the capabilities of the extensions are described needs to improve. But there's more to do than just that. The extension can only work with one data parameter in Teams, but you can work with up to 5 in Copilot. There's also some degree to which the variability of Copilot's inputs, because it's dealing with natural language, need to be handled by the back-end service. These changes will apply to both custom-developed in-house extensions and those provided by third parties. So if you rely on a third-party extension right now and you want to see it in Copilot, you could be in for a wait, as making it work is down to the extension's developer. However, you probably can't see any plugins outside of this group in Copilot at all yet. By default, the only plugin you can see is the Web Access plugin, and to enable any other Copilot plugins you need to opt in to a public preview on a tenant-wide basis. The process of getting this activated in your tenant can take a few days, but I will caution that this is a preview. Many features do not really work as described, even as described in the documentation, and unless you are really comfortable with what's going on here, it would be a bad idea to turn this capability on in any kind of production-connected tenant right now. When you enable plugins, it isn't just those Teams message extensions that light up as an option. The Copilot plugin ecosystem is much more complex and rich. But before we take a look at the low-code options, the plugin ecosystem for Copilot isn't the only thing that's complex about adopting AI in your business. And that's why I've put together my new on-demand course, Fly into the Age of Copilots. This 8-part video course, that includes some content from my book, Who's in the Copilot Seat, is designed for small and medium-sized business leaders who are interested in getting the most out of AI. It covers all the major topics necessary for understanding the current AI options, from how generative AI works through to issues of safety and risk, delivered with over an hour of original video content. And best of all, for a limited introductory period, it's completely free. So check out the link below, or send it to your colleagues, and get ready to fly into our new Copiloted age. Once you have your plugins preview turned on, you can head over to Copilot in Teams and use the prompt, "How can I use a plugin?" and you get a link to the Power Platform Copilot Plugins management page. This is where you can see connectors and flows that are available to be used as plugins. Now don't get too excited here. As the preview stands right now at the beginning of March, you are pretty limited in what you can do here. The connectors shown are the ones that are available. You cannot add custom connectors unless you get it certified by Microsoft, and the connectors must be consumption only, no write actions. To give you a taste of how this works, I'm going to turn on the MSM weather connector here and head back over to Copilot. Then I'm going to turn on the developer mode by typing -developer on. This allows me to track what plugin Copilot has opted to use. Then I'm going to turn on the MSM weather plugin in this chat and ask, "What is the weather in Cincinnati, Ohio tomorrow?" You can see that Copilot selects the activated plugin to answer this question and provides the answer. What's going on in the background is that Copilot is using the natural language description given in the actions in the plugin, whether that be a message extension, a Power Platform connector, or as we'll see, a flow or something else, to understand what that tool can do and select the right one. The most important thing to recognize here is that when we consider plugins, we are thinking of single transactions that take an input and give back an output of some description. Take that example I showed you at the start of the video. I have a SharePoint list using Microsoft's social media scheduler template, and I've connected that up to a Copilot initiated Power Automate flow that simply gets passed a date from Copilot and then responds with an HTML table of details of those posts for that date. I use the flow description to let Copilot know it needs to pass along a date and the input parameters on the flow itself. So in Copilot, when I prompt, "Find the social media posts that were published yesterday," it knows it can use this plugin to get that information. It knows it has to pass a date, so it works out what that is based on my natural language request, and this initiates that flow. It then takes the data it retrieves back in an HTML table, or could equally be some other type of structured response, and turns it back into the format of response it wants to give. However, we can use this same example to show why this is truly really powerful in the hands of Copilot, because all your plugin is doing is enriching its contextual data, and it retains all of the other skills it has from the layers underneath this extension. So let's try something different. Draft an email to my team giving them the details of the social media posts published yesterday. Copilot receives exactly the same format of data as it did from my flow previously, but because the intent of my prompt is different, it provides a response that's customized to my need. Imagine other use cases here. You want to analyze all the survey responses from yesterday. You want to write a report for your manager on all the service tickets that are currently open. If you have the existing skills to grab that data using Power Automate, you can avoid the pro-code complexity of Teams message extensions and the certification process of custom connectors and just jump in. But this is purely transactions based on an API-based search of your data using one dimension, the date of the post. Unlike Graph Connector index data, if I want to grab this a different way, perhaps by looking for the post type, I would need to create a different flow. So I've got this far in this video and I haven't mentioned Copilot Studio once. And you might think that that's a little odd, as that's the tool that's designed to extend Copilot, right? If we're talking about graph connectors or plugins of the Teams message extension or Power Platform connector variety, those exist entirely outside the context of Copilot Studio, or at least pretty much so. First of all, Copilot Studio takes everything that was Power Virtual Agents, so chatbots you can publish pretty much anywhere, and extends that functionality specifically for Copilot for Microsoft 365 users to provide a canvas from which to extend Copilot. The fact that we are now calling all these experiences Copilots, in my opinion, is crazy. If we're not going to give things names that allow us to easily differentiate between them, then we might as well take a page out of Winnie the Pooh and call them all Heffalumps. While Power Virtual Agent chatbots and Copilot for Microsoft 365 have some similarities, it's essential that we know which we're talking about when. The intent of Copilot extension inside Copilot Studio isn't just to extend the Copilot's reach with data, but also to be able to give you the ability to ensure the answers it provides to specific types of queries are tailored in the way you want and drawn from specific data, rather than just pulling data from wherever it likes within your semantic index. For example, I've decided here that if someone in my organisation asks about Bright Ideas Agency's services, they will be told we offer clown training and trapeze acts. Fun fact, I did once try the trapeze, and anyone who was there that day will tell you that I'm far better at AI than I am at circus skills. We do this using a conversational plugin built in Copilot Studio, and this allows me to fully tailor the type of response Copilot will give to a specific type of request. Now, you cannot tell Copilot exactly what to say, but you can tell it what information you want to include. I can include in conversational plugins specific internal or external data resources, links to Azure OpenAI service, Power Automate flow steps, and the ability to generate synthesized responses from any of the data I've brought into this conversational topic. Frankly though, the fact that this all happens within the context of a published bot and doesn't sit on its own within this tool is a little confusing. Thus my frustration with everything being called a Copilot. However, I must again reinforce that currently these features are in preview, and to some extent the demos Microsoft shows of what is to come here is a lot better integrated than it is right now. I must say though that in playing with these features so far, I've had far better luck just leveraging plain old Power Automate than trying to build anything through Copilot Studio. Although deploying the Copilot Studio app as a plugin is an important step to be able to use all of this stuff in your team's Microsoft 365 chat interface. I think the promise of Copilot Extensibility is probably the most exciting part of Copilot, as this is the necessary strand of this product that can push it from being a nice to have for a certain proportion of your business's work to a necessity for everything. However, while all the different routes to extend Copilot are very welcome, I do fear that managing all these options is going to become a headache, as having to turn on plugin A versus plugin B when you need to do X versus Y is not the seamless AI assistant that has been promised. For its part, of the plugins you have enabled, Copilot has a sophisticated approach to selecting the right plugin using the natural language description of what it does as a vital component. This aspect of low-code makers describing their work in a way that makes it work best with Copilot is going to be another barrier, and the documentation suggests that plugins clashing with one another based on their described functionality can be an issue. I suspect that over time, we will start to see much more robust management tools for these services, perhaps even moving toward the type of app policies we see in Teams, where an admin can define what apps you can see by default. Perhaps we get plugin policies, where an admin can enable certain plugins on a per user or group basis. Right now, you can just give users the right to use certain types of plugins, but you can't force them to. Beyond this, I think the key benefit in pulling all these resources into Copilot Studio is we may start to see more tailored internally facing Copilots for team members that don't need the full Copilot for Microsoft 365 experience. What I mean by this isn't something like Copilot for Sales, which is an experience that layers on top of Copilot for Microsoft 365, but one that cuts out all the graph index access, instead leveraging data that is specifically selected by the business for that persona. Perhaps by the end of this year, we see all Enter ID accounts get access to Microsoft 365 chat, but some only have access to resources built and licensed with Copilot Studio rather than everything in the semantic index. This would be a clever play by Microsoft, as they must know that many types of users will never have a need for Copilot for Microsoft 365, but could benefit from AI. But right now, these ideas are solely conjecture. For me, the release of these extensibility options is the most exciting part of Microsoft's AI journey since the announcement of Microsoft 365 Copilot nearly a year ago. It makes it clear that while we may be moving into a new paradigm for how we interact with data, Microsoft's commitment to building a platform that allows you to integrate the tools you want to use remains as strong as ever. Are you excited about this? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thanks for watching through to the end. Until the next video, bye bye.